What is GitHub Actions? It's a tool that allows you to automate software development workflows. GitHub Actions lets you carry out a process of actions, and in this context, these instructions are called workflows, triggered by a specific event. Let me give you a very simple and clear example. Let's say you have a website. This website has a repository with its source code on GitHub. You occasionally make some changes to the source code, and you would like that at the moment of a push, when you've made some new changes to the repository, this magical tool takes all the source files of your website and automatically uploads them to the production server. This is where GitHub Actions comes to our aid. In our case, the event is the push of changes. The action instruction or workflow will be to take all the source files and copy them to the production server. Let's take a look at this diagram for a more detailed understanding. Events are divided into several categories. There are repository events, external events, scheduled events, and manual events. The manual ones are pretty straightforward. We'll have a specific button, and our instructions will be triggered when we press that button. Scheduled events shouldn't really raise any questions either. We have a schedule so that our instruction runs every day at midnight. External events include sending requests to the recipe. Repository-related events include push, pull, request, and issue. In other words, when you push a specific branch, our workflow can be triggered. Or when creating pull request, we want our workflow to be triggered. Or when creating an issue, we also want to trigger certain instructions. I will also give a few examples of workflow so that you understand what kind of instructions there are in general. Let's say you might have an instruction for installing some dependencies, or an instruction for testing the code, or an instruction to open a certain issue, or you want to set up CI/CD for your project, or you want to send a message to a messenger, or you want to compile certain files, or maybe your entire project needs to be compiled. For all these actions or any other actions that your project requires, you create a workflow, you create an instruction, or you want to compile certain files, or maybe your entire project needs to be compiled. So for all these actions or any other actions that your project needs, you create a workflow, you create an instruction. And this instruction, besides the event we just discussed about when to trigger it, also has jobs. By a job, we mean what needs to be done. And this job can be one, or there can be many of them. Moreover, a job can have one step or several steps. So you can break down the instruction into steps. For example, the first thing you need to do is install all the necessary dependencies. The second step is to compile the code, or maybe even test the code first, and only then in the third step compile it. In the fourth step, you might need to perform some actions again, and in the fifth step, if no errors are found, take the source code and send it to the production server. In our workflow scheme, there are two blocks that are called runners. What is a runner in GitHub Actions? A runner is a virtual machine. So, to compile your code or to run certain commands, certain actions, you need a virtual machine. And GitHub can, for example, set up Windows, install Linux, or install macOS. This could be the latest version, or it could be a specific version of the system. So, when we say runner, we mean that GitHub Actions will spin up a virtual infrastructure. There are several types of runners. These are the runners on the GitHub side. These are your own runners. For example, you want to set up infrastructure in the cloud. There are also more personalized runners on the GitHub side. If the default runners, like the latest version of Linux, don't quite suit you, or if you need more RAM, you can reach out to GitHub, and they will set up a more customized operating system, meaning a virtual machine tailored to your needs. Let's take a look at the example mentioned at the beginning of this lesson in practice. I have a repository on GitHub. This is a directory with a separate plugin for a WordPress site. And from time to time, I make changes to this source code. And I need to take all the source code and copy it to the server at the moment. I push changes to the main branch in this case, so that all the changes I've made are reflected on the live site. Let's take a look at what our instructions, our workflow, look like. We'll learn how it's created later in this course. Right now, we're just going to take a look. So, it has two important aspects. Actually, there are three right now. This is the name. But I'm really interested in two because there are actually two important ones. This is the event. Here, I'm highlighting the event in blue. How is it decoded? On the event of a pre-push operation to the main branch, every single time I push something to the main branch, it will automatically trigger the specific job that is described in detail below. This job uses one runner. In my case, it's the latest version of Ubuntu Linux, meaning a virtual machine is spun up and Linux is installed on it. Next, I don't have any commands here. Our instructions can consist of commands like npm install or npm build, or they can be made up of actions. My instructions consist of actions. We'll get familiar with the actions later. So these are specific scripts that perform certain actions. They are developed by third-party developers and uploaded to the GitHub marketplace. So I have two steps here. The first one is an action to get the source code of the current repository. And the second step is to take and copy these files to the server. And I set certain configurations, of course, because this action asks me for the host, user, password, port, and the folder where everything should be placed. So, you see, it's a very simple instruction that consists of just 3 steps. The first one is the event on push. The second one is the job that runs on one runner. And this runner has 2 simple steps. And then, every time I push, if I go to the Actions tab, which is responsible for this tool, I'll see all the completed workflows. So, I pushed to the main branch of this repository 6 hours ago, and it took and executed all those steps. Since everything was successful, it marked it with a green check. This example shows how a simple task can be implemented in practice. Let's look at another scheme that will demonstrate how runners can interact with each other. For simple tasks, like taking and copying the source code and uploading it to the server, we use one runner. So, one virtual machine is enough, for example Linux, and it will use an action that takes the source code and uploads it to the server. For complex tasks, use 3 runners, Linux, macOS, and Windows. They run actions like installing node and npm commands in parallel on different virtual machines. In this case, you can create 3 runners, one for Linux, one for macOS, and one for Windows, and they will work in parallel with each other, performing specific actions. For example, you might need to install node, run certain commands like npm install, npm start, or npm build, and maybe some tests. So these commands will likely be the same, but they need to be executed on different virtual machines. For this reason, you will have 3 separate runners. Once these runners finish, you can trigger another common runner that will run some custom scripts or simply send a message to the responsible person that the compilation was successful on all 3 virtual machines. Now we know what GitHub Actions is, but we still have to learn how to work with it in this course. I suggest you move on to the next lesson. See you!